The Last of Us show is how you adapt a video game correctly. Yes, I know the game is heavily story focused, and I know other adaptations like Sonic and Arcane were critically praised. However, HBO's Last of Us was the first video game adaptation that made me go, holy crap, they did it accurately. It might even be better than the original. Now, before I go into why I think the way I do, some context about my overall history with this IP. The Last of Us was a game that went completely under the radar for me when it initially came out in 2013. I heard about it, but I just regarded it as another zombie thing that was extremely popular at the time. Mainly, I was playing games like Call of Duty and GT Online, as I wasn't really into story focused games or even single player games at the time. Anyways, one day my sister bought The Last of Us as she was interested in the game ever since the first teaser for it dropped. I kept hearing about how good and groundbreaking the story was. Out of curiosity, I decided to play it, and my god, did it change my entire view on gaming. After that, I totally got into single player story games like Uncharted, God of War, and Hellblade. So when I heard that HBO and PlayStation Studios were teaming up to create a show based on the game with Craig Mazin, the creator of Chernobyl, and Neil Druckmann, who wrote the original games, I was ecstatic. Not only was I confident in this creative team, but the actors they brought in to portray these characters, specifically Joe and Ellie, Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, both excellently made sure not to stray away too far from the source material in terms of bringing their own flair to these characters while also making it their own. Pedro plays Joel more rugged and softer as opposed to the game that plays him with a more hardened and aggressive side. You can see this from the way Pedro's Joel talks about Ellie's immunity compared to how it was handled in the game in episode 6. Bella plays Ellie more aggressive compared to the more vulnerable iteration in the game. Both are great for their respective mediums, however, so it's not really a knock on either one. This is just one example of how the show adapts its world and characters to better fit the medium of television. Another change they decided on was to make the show a lot more character centric than even the game, meaning most of the show showcases a lot more of the moment to moment character interactions as opposed to the game's balance of action and story. It makes sense in the game to have action take more of a spotlight because, well, it's a video game. Point is to interact with the world and have fun. In the show, however, the story really delves deep into not only your two main characters, but expands more on other side characters like Tess, Frank, Bill, Henry, Marlene, Tommy, and Maria, while also adding new characters like Kathleen and Anna, who we have never seen in the original game. We see this expansion right from the opening moments of episode 1 with the 60s talk show scene that discusses and brilliantly sets the audience into what this type of virus is and what the overall mood of the show will be when all hell breaks loose. When we get introduced to Joe and Sarah, we immediately start getting hints that something isn't right. First, with the radio broadcast reporting something wrong is happening in Jakarta, the students' hands shaking in the classroom, emptied roads as Sarah's walking down the street, the cops seemingly in a hurry to get somewhere when Sarah's in the store, the jets flying over the city. So much built up tension as we get closer and closer to the inevitable that we couldn't get in the original game because of the very medium it's in, can now be allowed to explore more of the world, that it makes what happens to Sarah far more impactful because we get to see it through her perspective early on. Bill and Frank get an entire episode which on its own is a masterpiece. I mean, it completely deviates from the game in terms of what happens to both characters. The role that Bill plays in the game is a much more active role to help with the main plot move forward, while in the show it's more thematic in terms of progressing Joel's arc and the eventual decision at the end of the story. It works to showcase how necessary love can be even in the worst of circumstances. Some consider episode 3 to be filler, but that is far more from the truth. You see, if the purpose of the Bill character in the game, other than the car battery of course, was to show who Joel can turn into if you wall yourself out completely, then I would argue that the purpose of Bill in the series showcases that Joel needs someone to care for and love again. Both iterations, while thematically different, work extremely well in helping Joel progress towards the story, and it was executed brilliantly. The entire show has moments where it deviates from the game, but the structure and even some scenes are nearly identical to what happens in the video game. For example, the car ride in Kansas where Ellie steals Bill's magazine, the scene in Jackson where Ellie and Joel have that emotional talk, or even the scene where we see Joel and Ellie with Sam and Henry in the bunker in episode 5. Speaking of Henry and Sam, their episodes included an addition from the game in Kathleen and her group of rebels whose goal is to overtake Fedra. In this iteration, Sam and Henry are seen by this group as traitors who sold out the leader of this group, who also happens to be Kathleen's brother. In the game, they're just random hunters that you encounter. Anyways, this overall structure of the Sam and Henry arc is relatively similar to what happens, but it expands on characters and story themes. We get more time spent in Jackson in episode 6, and we see more of Joel's trauma and self-doubt on keeping Ellie safe, and my god, does Pedro kill it in this episode. Pedro's ability just to showcase his acting while just sitting there and explaining to Tom tell me why he needs to take Ellie was heartbreaking. Throughout the show, you really feel that Joe just can't keep up with his age. You see it time to time during the show. Last of Us also feels proud to be a video game adaptation, which I really appreciate because I believe video games is just as impactful and engaging as films and television. In fact, I think they might even be more engaging because of the very nature of the medium. They bring back key figures from the game like Troy Baker, who's seen in episode 8, Ashley Johnson, who plays Ellie's mom in episode 9, Jeffrey Pierce, who's seen in both episodes of 4 and 5. Not to mention that they bring back the composer of the original games, Gustavo Santaolalla. I think that's how you pronounce the name. I hope this show marks a new age of great video game adaptations. Yes, I know we had the Sonic movies, which are good. Also, I'm aware that we had Cyberpunk and Arcane, which are both fantastic, don't get me wrong. However, those shows are based on characters or the world from those games rather than a straight up adaptation. Like Edge Runners isn't adapting Cyberpunk 2077 and Arcane isn't adapting League of Legends. The Last of Us is adapting the video game version of that game. The Last of Us is a faithful adaptation that happens to also be great. Sony already announced that we're getting a God of War series for Amazon and Horizon Zero Dawn series for Netflix. Not to mention Nintendo has that new Super Mario movies releasing later this year, which looks extremely promising. So if both Sony and Nintendo continue releasing content with the same level of quality that The Last of Us has provided, we can very well see other companies like Microsoft attempt to produce shows or even movies about their IPs. This new decade could very well be the era of video game adaptations, and it looks more and more likely now than ever for them to take over, considering how much of a mixed bag super movies have been in the past year or two. I'm very excited to see how Mazin and Druckmann handle part 2, especially with how controversial that game is. They already confirmed that part 2 will take longer than one season to adapt, which makes complete sense. The game is long and you can easily tell that story in 2 seasons. There is a midpoint in the game where you can very easily cut off and continue that into a 3rd season, and if you play the game, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyways, yeah, the show's incredible and I'm glad it's getting the praise it deserves. Let me know how you guys feel about the show and if you prefer the video game iteration of it or not. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe, as I would have more videos on the way. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.